get started. All right. Hey, good morning, everyone. Thank you for meeting us bright and early on a Monday morning. I know that you're all very busy people, so we appreciate you taking time to get together with us this morning to talk about an issue that's very important to the County Commission, which is a focus on what we can do to expand early childhood education opportunities in Buncombe County. As I'm sure many of you may have read or heard, the County Commission at our last meeting in December adopted a set of organizational priorities, and there's just 6 priorities, and one of those key priorities that we established was to ensure that we do all that we can to make sure all kids in Buncombe County receive the early childhood education they need during the first critical 2,000 days of their lives. And the establishment of that priority, a lot of that has to do with the important feedback that we receive from many of the people in this room. And we've enjoyed working with many partners to take steps in that direction over the last couple of years, but we know we have a long way to go. So we wanted to get together today to share some information about what the county is up to, why we see this as a priority, but we know that many of the folks in this room work on this issue every day from a professional or academic standpoint. So we really are here to learn from you about what we can do to help achieve this important and ambitious goal. So thank you for being here. Thank you to all the county commissioners who are with us this morning. Commissioner Ellen Frost will also be joining us in just a few minutes. She's on the way. And I want to turn it over to Commissioner Jasmine Beach Ferrara to say a few more words about what we're hoping to accomplish today. Jasmine.
Thanks. Good morning, everybody. It's great to be here with you all. In addition to thanking everyone for being here, I just want to take a moment to thank fellow commissioners. Commissioner Presley and I have had the great honor in the past year of really getting to do a lot of work in this area, and there's been nothing but support and great ideas from other folks on commission around that. So I hope you all know that this is something that we take very seriously as a priority. Our conversation today really builds on a series of public conversations we've been having in the last year to better understand the landscape that we're in. Those conversations have appropriately been driven by experts in the field, folks who have been doing this work for decades and who do it each and every day and understand best of all what it would take for us to significantly expand access to early childhood education, specifically at the 3- and 4-year-old level. So I want to give absolute deference to that expertise. And today's conversation I really see as another building block in understanding what's happening right now, but also imagining together what's possible. We've known from the very start that if we are to significantly expand access to preschool and pre-K, high quality preschool and pre-K, it was not going to be a one-off project that involved just a few organizations and entities. It was going to be a community-wide commitment, the scale of which we hadn't seen here previously, and one that would require significant investment from local governments, from school systems, from providers, from the business community, and from the higher education community. Really a diverse group of stakeholders looking at how we can come together to begin to change the story that's been true in Buncombe for a long time, which is that we know 1 in 4 of our kids live in poverty. About that number of kids don't have enough food each day. When a child starts their life in that way, we know the kinds of things that they are likely to experience. And if we're seriously committed to changing that, and I've heard nothing but that serious commitment from folks, we also know that expanding access to preschool and pre-K is one of the most positive, impactful steps that we can take. So today's conversation is about diving into an issue that's been there from the start as we've been looking at what it would involve to scale this up, which is how do we help recruit and support and retain and respectfully compensate the teachers, the educators who will staff these classrooms and programs as they're built out. And that conversation naturally needs to include our partners in higher education. There's been a lot of exciting work done locally on that question, and it's one I know many folks have been working on again for decades. One thing that motivates and excites me, thinking about this on the policy level and on the way the county can be the best partner possible in this work, is that there's incredible opportunities for innovation, for creativity, for ideas that may be a bit outside the box. Communities all over the country are wrestling with exactly this question. And there's models emerging around the country. Many of you probably saw the New York Times Sunday Magazine cover about exactly this issue last week. But what excites me is that we have the opportunity to create a Buncombe model that's really built around the incredible strengths that we have here in our community and the specific characteristics that we have here today. So thank you all for sharing your time to be with us this morning, but thank you beyond that for the work you do every single day on these important issues. We're very excited and honored to be partnering with you. I'll turn things over now to Rachel Nygaard.
Good morning, and thank you for that introduction. My name is Rachel Nygaard, and I work here at Buncombe County as the Director of Strategic Partnerships, and I'm honored and excited to have the opportunity to work with the partners in this room to continue this conversation. And today's session is a call to action. So we have, like Commissioner Beach-Ferrara mentioned, been having this conversation at a lot of levels for a long time and have been gaining momentum. And in our September work session that the Board of Commissioners held on this topic, we identified workforce as a major barrier within the system. And so today's session is specifically focused on those workforce elements of the issue. And we want to be as tangible and action-oriented and specific as we can in our discussion. But to begin, I do want to sort of acknowledge the leadership of the Board of Commissioners, the members of higher education. We really appreciate the representatives of the colleges and universities putting this into your schedule this morning. I had a list of who they are, but we've got Western Carolina University, Warren Wilson. There's a representative from Warren Wilson College who's on her way, University of North Carolina, UNCA. Mars Hill University will be here, Lenore Ryan University, Blue Ridge Community College, AB Tech, and the ASU. So very much appreciate the commitment from each of these schools to being part of the conversation. And also here to share regrets from the members of the legislative delegation. The General Assembly members are double booked, triple booked. They're at a broadband session this morning. And their lack of being here is certainly not an indication of their lack of commitment or interest in the topic. So one thing that we'll do during the conversation is make note of things that we want to carry forward to the General Assembly that might come out as next steps from this discussion. So I will do an overview of the issue to cover some of the background, where we've come from. We will have an opportunity to hear from some providers. We've got a room full of providers, and we've asked 3 providers representing public, private, and Head Start settings to share with us that provider perspective. So Don Meskel, the principal of Asheville City Schools Preschool, Jackie Pennick from Verner Center for Early Learning, and Brian Repass from Community Action Opportunities Head Start will be on the agenda a little bit later to share about that provider side, what they're feeling in terms of recruitment and retention and development and compensation of teachers in early childhood education. We will have an opportunity for remarks from the college and university representatives and commissioners, and finally a facilitated discussion, and that is the piece of the agenda that we've given the most time. You'll see Post-it notes around the room. And we invite people to make a note as the presentation happens and throughout the conversation of 3 things. So if you think of a question that you'd like addressed during this conversation or later, write question at the top of your Post-it note and make a note of your question. Same with comment. We'll go around and kind of pick those up and make sure that they either get addressed today or put in the parking lot to revisit. And finally, what we really want to hear is those ideas. We've captured a few ideas so far that we've heard from listening and from being in conversation with partners, but if you think of something tangible, short-term, maybe long-term, that we can do from our various roles and perspectives to get at solutions related to workforce issues in early childhood education, make a note, and then we'll have time during the discussion to talk about those ideas. What is this? What would it take to make it happen? How do we move it forward? So, question, comment, idea. Before we begin with background, I wanted to mention some semantics. We talk about this field using a lot of different words. Today I'm going to use the phrase early childhood education. We really are talking about birth through kindergarten, child care, early care and education, preschool, pre-K. There are a lot of different elements of this depending on whether it's all day, all year, what age group is being served, what funding source is being pulled in. So I'm going to broadly talk about early childhood education, knowing that pre-K is an area of special interest and emphasis. We get to revisit what it is and why it matters. Pre-K has been proven to have results, and access to early childhood education in general allows families to access the workforce. Those parents can work knowing that their children are in a safe and developmentally positive environment during the day, and it has benefits, early childhood education, for the students, for those children being served intellectually, developmentally, socially, while they're being served, and as they enter school, ready to succeed, and in their future, children who have been through a high-quality preschool program are proven to have higher math scores, higher reading scores, better attainment through life, and studies point to the economic returns at the community-wide level for these kinds of investments. But it's complicated. We know that it's a good thing, but we have a lot of barriers that we face within this sort of fragile and complex system. We've talked a lot about availability and affordability barriers. There isn't enough childcare to go around. Centers maintain long wait lists, and the care that's available isn't always affordable. Affordable for the family in the care, affordable for the provider who's trying to maintain this business model and meet all of their expenses. And if a family can find care that is affordable, that doesn't always mean that it's the right care for the situation that their family has. They may be coming in with trauma or special needs, geographic preferences. I don't need to tell anyone in this room that the funding within early childhood education is complex and it's limited. There's funding from the federal level and state level and local level, and private providers and funders and grants. And all of this goes together to create a workforce that we're going to dig into a little bit. Chairman Newman referenced the strategic priority that Buncombe County has placed. We selected as a county 6 priorities that this Board of Commissioner wants to focus on in the, as a frame to support their overall sustainability goals in the community. And early childhood education has come forward as one of those priorities. A copy of a issue brief on early childhood education is made available in the materials out in the hallway. But what I wanted to bring forward from that is the goal specific to workforce. We envision a community in which every child has an equal opportunity to thrive in that first 2,000 days. And in order to achieve that vision, we need a few things to be in place. And one of those, our focus of our session today, is that career track, that robust career track where people can enter the field as substitute teachers. They can go through the stages of development, have people who have associate's degrees, bachelor's degrees, master's degrees, years of education, and opportunities to recruit and draw to this field and retain people who work in the field. The board has done a lot over the last year. 108 new slots were funded through these partnerships. The Johnston Elementary School, new Head Start classroom, partnering with ELIDA for expansion, and Christine Avery Learning Center for a new classroom. All of this leveraging NC Pre-K, which is a funding source for preschool, to make the sort of county and state dollars go further. The most recent investment was the Lonnie D. Burton Child Development Center, and one of the things that struck members of the board and want to have this call to action is that we weren't able to get that classroom open this spring because of lack of ability to recruit a teacher. That doesn't mean we won't come back and revisit it on the next cycle. Brian can speak to that a little bit during the provider perspective or during question and answer session later. So because the issue is so complex, it's not one of those things that just money can fix. Want to give a nod to the momentum that has been happening, the conversation here and across the state and country. There's a picture of the Asheville Buncombe Preschool Planning Collaborative report on preschool expansion, which came out last fall. That was presented to the Board of Commissioners during that September work session. That was the culmination of many years of work and many different work groups within that, including one on workforce. And that work continues to figure out how to operationalize and implement that expansion. Kidnomics is a set of forums that are being held by the Institute of Emerging Issues at North Carolina State, which also held a Blue Ribbon Commission that Commissioner Beach-Ferrara participated in. We've got organizations here like Buncombe Partnership for Children, like Southwest Child Development Commission. We've got groups of organizations like the WNC Early Childhood Collaborative that are working on solutions to barriers. We have these state firms that put together toolkits and summits and forums, like the Institute for Emerging Issues, like the Early Childhood Foundation. And at the national level, there's a picture of the article that came out from the New York Times, which we have in our reference links. If you haven't read it, it's a good read. It must have hit my inbox a dozen times in the couple of weeks since it came out. It's very poignant. It's hard to talk about workforce without talking about quality. So quick primer, North Carolina uses a star rating system for childcare. It's a point-based scoring system based on program standards and staff education. And so program standards might be things like classroom size, teacher ratios, operational policies, and then the staff education speaks to credentialing, degrees, but also coursework and experience. And this system has been in place for about 20 years in North Carolina. So the government also defines quality through funding sources. North Carolina pre-K is considered in many ways the gold standard for quality within preschool settings. And there are other, Head Start is another that has very high quality standards that's funded by the federal government. That have similar kinds of program and staff education standards that are specific to those programs. And it was the North Carolina pre-K standards that were in place in addition to the Head Start standards in that Lonnie D. Burton classroom in recruiting for needing somebody, specifically in that case, I think, somebody with a birth to kindergarten 4-year degree as a lead teacher. And if it's hard to talk about workforce without talking about quality, it's hard to talk about quality without talking about cost. Quality is tied to cost. It's very expensive to meet those standards. I see heads nodding of a lot of providers in the room. The teacher ratios and the requirements for staff, the subsidized child care program, there's a handout on that out in the hallway. The reimbursement rates, the market rates haven't kept pace with the costs, and the rates are not consistent across the state. A major driver of cost is personnel. It's those teachers. Providers are challenged finding qualified teachers, finding people who, schools are challenged, finding people who want to enter the field. I had a brief conversation with one of the education, with the university before the session started, saying we did used to have a program, and it was hard keeping students in the program. So what is that that's keeping people from entering the field? What is it that's keeping people from advancing in the field? We know that wages are a big part of that. Low wages make it hard to recruit for. As a result, there are limited opportunities locally in higher education for people to enter the field. I'm going to pass to Jackie, Brian, and Dawn to share a little bit from the provider perspective. We'll have a chance for remarks, and then we'll start having conversation.
Push that up. Oh, I've got to do that too. Sorry. Put that in. Okay, you can do it. Okay. You can go ahead. Okay. Well, the first thing that I want to do is thank everybody for coming and especially thank the commissioners for having us all together. It's been sort of a dream of mine for many, many years. The second thing that I want to say to all of the representatives from higher ed, my first part is higher ed challenges. This is based on our challenges, not your challenges for providing what we need. So it's not meant as criticism at all, just kind of what it is. And then the last thing is I have found that over the years, my best solutions come from thinking outside of the box, so we are going to have to do that today. So the first thing is enrollment in teacher education programs throughout the state are down by 30%. That's not just for birth to kindergarten, but the whole field. Secondly, question is the birth to kindergarten degree outdated? Does it need to be reviewed in light of our focus on a state in birth through third grade, and that we know that the continuum of early childhood is truly birth through 8 years of age? We might need to review that degree itself, but while we have it, we need to train people in it. There are very limited opportunities in this area for someone to get a birth to kindergarten 4-year degree. In fact, in Buncombe County, there are none. The closest college is Western Carolina, and the next closest is Appalachian. Many of the people who desire this degree are currently working. It makes it a hardship and sometimes impossible to be able to be on site if it's not all online for them to go to Western and certainly to Appalachian. We did have a BK program at UNCA for a few years. ETSU had an early childhood cohort here in Buncombe County for 1 year. And you can tell how old I am in the 70s, the later 70s though. Mars Hill, now university, actually developed a preschool program, a degree program. But when the federal money went away, so did we. Let's see. Then I wanted to talk about the college grads in the birth to kindergarten programs that aren't currently working and want to advance, but are graduates from high school and then go for that degree. Oftentimes after they get the degree, they go back home to work, and jobs are plentiful if they live in North Carolina. Or they may want to stay in the center or program where they got their degree, did their practicum, did their internship, and are knowledgeable about those centers. That leaves Buncombe County out of that. Then let's talk a little bit about the local availability of early childhood focused programs. We have several in Western North Carolina that are available to our students. We need to make sure they're rigorous and of the highest quality so that we're training people either in certificate programs or in AA degrees that are highly skilled and can give us what we need. The cost for community college for many of us is quite reasonable. But for many of those that are on the lower end of the pay spectrum, it can still be a deterrent. And something that we need to take a look at. It's also TEACH is a state program that helps people go to school. It helps offset the cost. But with TEACH, your center that you work in has to provide you bonuses at different levels and also time out of the classroom to study. Both of those things are barriers when you're struggling to have people to teach children in the classroom and you have very little subs, which is also a challenge. I think one of the real challenges is accessibility. If you are working in the daytime, it's very difficult to get out to go to classes. Classes being online help a great deal with that, but it still can be a struggle to only have what you need perhaps happening in the day. I think the other thing that we've dealt with the most is if somebody needs a certain class and it's not offered that term, it may not be offered for 2 terms. And so what happens is you either have to delay being hired because you don't have a credential, or you delay getting a raise. The impact on centers is we can't get people as soon and quickly as we need them to fill a vacancy or to expand or to meet standards that we're held to. So that's the end of my part, and so I'll let you go next.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about the teacher support challenges that we face. I will say that it's important to note that these are challenges we face, and they look very different for our 3 centers, even though we represent public, private, and Head Start. We are larger centers, so for smaller centers, these issues are tenfold. First, the lack of a career pipeline for early educators. We've talked a little bit about that already this morning. We have high school programs, we have a strong community college representation, and then we have our universities in the surrounding area, but we're looking for that pipeline to kind of help people get through all of those programs and then come into our centers. A piece that is really probably more relevant to those of us providing NC Pre-K, and I think there's a lot of centers out there who would like to provide NC Pre-K but can't because of some of these barriers, is this North Carolina Educator Effectiveness System. It's not a bad system at all, it's just difficult when you're, for a public school, it's embedded in our program, it's part of what we do. But for those community providers who also want to hire licensed teachers, they have to use the Early Educator Support Licensure and Professional Development Program to do this, and that is an underfunded program that results in kind of delays in getting teacher support. I think teachers have faced licensure delays because of that program being underfunded, not unfunded. So while we're all kind of held to that same standard, it looks different depending on which agency you work for. Another piece is the professional development requirements versus what we feel like our teachers need. And so, again, I don't know that anyone, Jackie or Brian can correct me, would argue with the heart and the spirit of the requirements that we have from DCDEE and the teacher licensure programs, but it's a lot. And so right now, this year, we're required to provide 20 hours of Pro Solutions training, which is really your basics, your bloodborne pathogens, your safe environments, things like that. Again, you wouldn't argue that they're not important. And then also 22 hours of North Carolina Foundations for Early Learning training. So that's 42 hours of training we're required to provide our staff. We all agree it's important, but we're not provided with the time or the funding to do that. The two of them are provided for free, but the time to do them is hard to come by. And a point that Jackie made when we were talking earlier is if you, for subsidy, if you close for more than 15 days a year, you're penalized. So we are kind of penalized for trying to provide the time to provide these trainings in addition to holidays and all the snow days we just had. We also have a new requirement that all staff are CPR trained. Again, not something we would argue with, but we have to fund that or require our staff to pay for it. I'm sorry, I'm getting a cold. The other piece to this that I find is a barrier, and I imagine other folks do as well, is that if you have a substitute in a classroom or in a center, not just a classroom, in your center, so my center has, one of my centers has 7 classrooms. If a sub is there for more than 10 days, they have to have all the same trainings. So it's hard enough to find people to participate as substitutes and then add 42 hours of training to their plate. And then the last piece, I think, for the professional development is that we all want to respond to the needs of our children and our staff. And so there are some pieces, I think Brian's going to talk about caregiver well-being and what we know is best for kids and what our population that we're serving might need. But we have a hard time finding the time to provide that training when we need to provide all of these other trainings without that time. A quick antidote that I'll give too, we're talking a lot about teacher, but in terms of workforce, administrative needs too for centers is lacking. Jackie also mentioned a difficulty finding qualified center managers. We recently had a staff member who has a master's in birth and kindergarten education, 20 years of experience, and taught a course that she was required to take that very course she taught to get her admin degree license. So, and she's not the only one. I see you guys shaking your heads, yes.
Took those courses
Yes.
too.
So it's sometimes I think there's a few things we can change to make things easier.
Well, as we've mentioned and talked about, what we really need is a robust pipeline of employees, all the way from high school graduates with one community college class, all the way up to bachelor and master level degrees, to get to the quality that we want for our child care centers. The thing is we are, for NC Pre-K and Head Start, we're competing with the school systems for licensed professionals. And that makes it challenging for us because there's not many. Not only are we competing for the school systems, but we're competing for a smaller slice of the licensing workforse. So with the BK degree, there's less people going into teaching, less people going into BK even. And so we compete with them for that. This week, and what I want to talk about a little bit is our personal experience that we had this fall. We've had 3 teaching vacancies this fall. We interviewed 7 potential employees and made offers to 6 of those, and we had 1 person accept. 2 people didn't accept, and it's one of my biggest pet peeves at this point is these were retired teachers with 20 and 30 years experience and early elementary ed licenses, and they would have had to gone back to college and taken early childhood education classes in order to qualify for an exception to get their BK license. And the challenge with that is we have the programs in place to support those teachers in the classroom. So there is a big difference between elementary education and early childhood education, but we have put things into place. We have processes in place to help support those teachers make that transition. And so I think that's one of, like I said, one of the things that I've noticed is we had folks who wanted to work for us who were willing to take our salaries, but when it came down to them actually having to go back to school after retiring, they were really not interested in that. 2 turned us down to actually go work for the school system. So that's not the worst thing, but certainly doesn't help us any. And then 1 turned us
John knows.
and 1 turned us down. The other thing I would say is that when they go to work for the school system is also related to salaries. And then 1 turned us flat down for salaries. And the challenge that I have with that is we pay better than most child care centers. And I can probably confidently say we pay better than most private child care centers and pay better than most providers in the town. And we have a hard time hiring. And so I think that's indicative of the challenge that the industry has as a whole. Our teacher assistants were at $12 an hour for those folks. For our qualified teachers with a license, we're at $19.63 as the beginning salary. Our average teacher salary is about $20.50. So what I hope and what we strive for is to first of all, to be able to hire experienced people with those degrees, but we also work to develop that pipeline within ourselves. And that's one of the things that I think Head Start's really great at. Is, we have parents who come in and start volunteering in our classrooms. They can become substitutes for us. Once they become a sub, we have an education program that will help them go back to school, and they become a teacher assistant. From a teacher assistant, they can work their way into being a licensed, go through and get a 4-year degree and then get their license. And so, the challenge that I've seen since I've been here, we've probably had maybe 3 or 4 employees that have done that whole process. So it's exciting to see when it happens, but it's not a daily occurrence. One of the other things that I want to talk about is that as with every industry and employer in Buncombe County, we do have a challenge with low salaries and challenges with benefits compared to the cost of living in Buncombe County, and that I think really does impact us probably more so because of our tend to be lower salaries. Don touched on our teacher licensure and qualification barriers, and I've talked a little bit about those. But the real challenge is that I see is that early childhood education is it's a complex regulatory environment, and you don't think of people who are just taking care of children and educating children as having to deal with that. But not only the administrators and center directors, but the teachers deal with a very complex regulatory environment every day, and that's from keeping children safe to doing high quality education through our curriculums, and then through our child outcomes data, which is our is how we measure child progress, and then report that to the families, to our program, and to the community. So I think the other issue that we have, certainly the substitute pool is a real challenge, is that making sure we have that pipeline of folks coming in. And then the other thing that's really important to talk about is, I'm sure with any caregiver employment, this is critical. But what we see within our teachers and staff, is a real caring and love for the children. They love their jobs, they love what they do, but they also tend to have real challenges. What we're finding is that our employees have high ACE scores, which impact how their future health. And then just that balance of all the rules and regulations in the classrooms, and having to balance that with wanting to have the best outcomes for children and families. And that's the sort of the last thing I'll say is that we always talk about students and children, but you can't separate that from families. And that's something that early childhood does so well, is we're interacting with those families on a daily basis, and we have that opportunity to do that future guidance and support with their children's education. And I think that's one of the benefits of the high quality early childhood education that brings, that we're all, and that's the reason we're all here to talk about. So thank you.
Brian, you want to just please say what ISO score is? I know you won't.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I use that.
Some people would like.
It's the adverse childhood experiences, and it's
Trauma.
it's about how your trauma in your early years impacts your health later in your life. And there's a lot of research and data going on, and a lot of support and talk about around those issues.
One thing I'll add real quick to what Brian was saying about salaries is that while the public school is probably one of the better compensating programs in the area, North Carolina is still 41st in the nation for teacher pay, and that's the pay that we're offering. And so while they're competitive for sure, just in general, that low pay across the state coupled with the high cost of living in Buncombe County, to me, makes that even more of a dire situation.
As nationally, where do the non-certified teaching assistants, where do they lay? Has that ever been in North Carolina?
Nothing has ever been looked at. It's a low salary for sure. Most of my teaching assistants, and again, I probably are the best. I'm the best compensating agency, and they qualify for public benefits most of the time.
Well, Buncombe County Schools as well.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, we know that very well, don't we, Ms. Frost?
I just wanted to add just a couple additional challenges real quickly, and to reiterate that even though we're tiered in the amount of money that we have to work with, our support for various services, the vast majority of programs in this county are much smaller programs, and they don't have the resources we have. And so to try to get people out of classrooms for additional training, to provide professional development when there's not much money. I know even one of the larger centers in our town had to hire a staff person just to manage the child care voucher system and the requirements of funding agencies. It's an extreme burden on the smaller centers. And then just to reiterate real quickly what Brian and Don said, that this, I don't have to tell you, the salaries in Buncombe are depressed, not just in our field, but across the board. And yet, the cost of doing business, the cost of living here, is not depressed. And it mirrors, if not exceeds, the other metropolitan areas. So there's a big gap between what parents here can afford to pay for high-quality early care and education and what the costs are. So what happens? How do we fill that gap? Centers close, which has happened. We don't expand. We focus on the area where we get reimbursed the most, which is 3 to 5-year-olds, especially the NC pre-K, the year before school. What that means is that we have an extreme shortage of places for infants and toddlers to be served. And those parents need to work as much as anybody else if they are in the workforce. And infants and toddlers need a very enriching environment more than any other age child. So the results are long waiting lists, and the gap is often made up where our expense is the highest, and that's personnel. And thus, we have the low wages. I could talk a whole hour and a half about subsidy, but I won't. Child care subsidy reimbursement rates, as I hope everyone knows, are low in Buncombe County. They are the lowest of any other metropolitan area by far. But I am excited to say, after 10 or 15 years of work, we have finally gotten a green light from the Division of Child Development, Early Childhood, to, we have a subcommittee to look at alternative methodology to try to make the reimbursement rates more equitable. Well, we're going to do our darndest on it. That could take 2 to 5 years because of the way the pipeline works, and we have a crisis right now. So that's what we need to talk about. Did mention administrators. There's a shortage. This is the most stressful time I have ever experienced to be an administrator in early childhood. And so the skill level that is needed for administrators is the highest it's ever been, and our training is very limited. So that's another area that we need to look at. So thank you very much. And Rachel? Thank you.
Thank you. Hey, that's great. And before we shift to the next session, part of the discussion, just want to welcome Representative Susan Fisher. We're so glad to have you with us, and of course Ellen Frost Moonsham would be here as well. So great to have all of you with us. All right.
Absolutely. I'm going to send a sign-in sheet around the room. Please make sure you jot your name on there before we leave today. We have begun to get questions. There are Post-it notes around the room. You may write question, comment, or idea. We'll run around and collect those. Before we go to our question period, we've had 4 arrivals from our higher education folks. Would you like to introduce yourself and go around the sort of higher education and Board of Commissioners table, and then if there's anyone among this table that wants to make a remark before we move into questions and answers and the idea brainstorming, we can do that.
I'm Dr. Kathy Grist, and I'm the director of the Birth Kindergarten Program at Western Carolina University. Thank you for having me. My name is Meredith Whitfield, and I'm the director of external relations at Western Carolina University.
I'm Jeff Combs, the Dean of Social Sciences at UNC Asheville, and the Department of Education falls in the social sciences group too as well. My training is an economist, so the simultaneity of a service that is both too expensive and undervalued.
Well put.
Dan Lunsford, President, Marshall University.
You gonna skip to higher education? I'm in Stone, and I'm the Buncombe County.
I'm Kit Kramer with the Asheville Chamber, and I'm not supposed to be sitting here.
You
Andy offered me a seat, and I took it.
We have got a room full of awesome representatives from workforce, from the education systems, providers, and we're glad for every one of you.
Mike Fryer, County Commissioner.
Robert Presley, County Commissioner.
Jasmine Beach for our county commissioner.
Brownie Neiman, County Commissioner.
Joe Bell just stepped out, County.
Probably thought you were saying.
I'm Al Whiteside, County Commissioner.
Ellen Frost, County Commissioner.
Susan Fisher, District 114, North Carolina House.
Beth Stewart, Vice President of Instruction, AB Tech.
Jennifer Bosworth, Chair of Early Childhood Education at AB Tech.
Brenda Blackburn, Dean of Business and Service Careers at Blue Ridge Community College and an early childhood instructor.
Kathy Allen, Vice President for Instruction at Blue Ridge Community College.
Jamie Conrad, the Coordinator of Experiential Learning and Outreach for Lenore Ryan University.
Before we move into questions, is there any remark that, I loved your concise summary. It's complicated. Yes, ma'am.
A couple of things just for the previous talk, and then some of the questions up here, that there's a couple of initiatives in the state that are pretty exciting, and my colleagues from the community college and four-year institutions that have BK programs will know that there's going to be an articulation agreement that all early childhood students who are in community colleges will bring in 60 hours into four-year institutions, which should hopefully fast track those students, make it easier to get a four-year degree. And I don't know if you guys want to add anything to that.
It's going to be great. And the West was well represented in the planning of this articulation agreement. Both Kathy and I were on that planning committee, so we had hands-on with what was going on and the decisions that were made. It was a great experience for us because it was an opportunity for us to come together and make this decision ourselves, rather than in some states, I believe Florida and Texas, in fact, they were told, their legislature did something similar to what ours did and said, here, you must do this articulation agreement, and here's what it's gonna look like. Instead, North Carolina said, you're gonna do this, y'all figure it out, and they gave us deadlines.
So is it specific to AB Tech?
It's specific to
across the state.
all 58 community colleges and the 12 universities that offer BK programs. So it's a relatively amazing program, and I believe, Brenda, you said earlier that we've been working on it on our end.
10 years.
For 10 years.
Oh, more than that.
Or more.
Okay, Kathy.
I've been on for 10 years. Kathy's been on for 20.
Yeah, and it'll be in place starting this fall.
And the second thing I just wanted to mention was, I'm sure that some of you in the room know who are in early childhood, is that licensing is getting ready to change in the state, and no one is quite sure how that is going to happen, but we know that it will. It looked like from the beginning stages it was going to be a birth through 3 license. I think that they have backed off of that, and now it might be a pre-K through 3, but nothing has been set, but it looks like it will definitely be changing. And at Western, we've been meeting with our elementary ed colleagues to figure out how we can blend together better and make it easier, because I think as Brian Greenpass said, that when someone is an elementary ed teacher, they do have to go back and get some of the early childhood coursework, and that is not easy if you are a retired teacher. So I just wanted to mention those things. And then very quickly is that we have an all online program for birth kindergarten, and are beginning to work on a master's degree. And I'll let Meredith talk a little bit about tuition.
Starting in fall of 2018, one of the great things about tuition at Western, which would also affect the birth through kindergarten online program, is that the legislature put this program in place starting fall 2018. Our tuition is going to be $500 a semester for our students. And that is for a full-time student. So if there was someone who was using our online program and they were part-time, it would actually cost less than $500 a semester for someone to pay tuition for Western. So there's some affordable options that are within reach even here in Buncombe.
You want to start with some questions?
So last week we heard from fire chiefs, and the commonality there to this is overwhelming in that the legislature, and that was one of my questions, whether this has happened over the years, but the regulations and the licensing that fire chiefs have to do, it's not sustainable. It's simply not sustainable. So now our firefighters are making $9.20 an hour. They don't have the equipment they need to be safe. And now, hearing this, the commonality, it's almost as if people in charge don't believe in something, they keep changing the goalposts. Once one thing has been achieved, then they move it further. And it puts this onus on the counties to pay, whether it be raising the wages for teachers' assistants to be competitive, so they want to stay here, or firefighters. And to me, that's the big elephant in the room. How do you come up with the best plan in the world and then have someone have the ability to move the goalpost? So that's the frustration I feel.
Mm-hmm. Is there anyone that can speak to when the requirements and from the educational requirements from the General Assembly developed? Have they added more over the years?
Well, I think
Have
you
they
gotta
added more recently?
You gotta take it higher than the assembly. You gotta take it at the federal level. There's a state and federal issue. Over time, somebody said 20 years, 10 years. This has happened over time where the regulatory environment has blown up. We live in a litigious environment, where the people I just think of, school bus drivers. Everybody's heard the stories over and over, and that when I was a kid, it only took one look in the mirror from a guy just scared me to death where I just shut up. And now it's just different. It's when you speak up as a teacher, or you try to do the best you can, you're afraid, and it's
But
that's very frustrating. I have the same frustration that Commissioner Frost has, and I think sometimes this is just overwhelming, really, when you're sitting here as a commissioner and you have a heart for the lowest paid people. And but me, we don't have a heart for everybody else. But when you hear the information about firefighters, and you hear the information about teacher assistants, and you have an opportunity to do something about it, you really want to do that. And then you do the math, and you go, that's not always able to. You're not always able to do that in one session. So I think from a legislative standpoint, I do thank Ms. Fisher for being here. I understand there was that we're competing with broadband today, is what I hear. I won't get into that because I'll just say this trumps broadband. That's awesome. But they're both very important to the education of our children, so we have to look at that. But this becomes overwhelming as a commissioner, because we are not only charged to serve from our heart, but we're also charged to serve from our head when we look at funding. So,
but there are states with far better models than we have.
well,
Thank you for adding in the federal level, because that's another.
Yeah, I think we deal with challenges at both levels,
Yeah.
and we actually you know, served on as a voting delegate for the Association of County Commissioners in North Carolina, and that exists to keep the state and federal from pushing things down to us. Because it's easy to do that. And we are in charge of now trying to figure out how to be part of the solution, so. And we want to do that.
Rachel, I'd like to make a comment here because just recently, this weekend, I read something in the North Carolina Policy Watch, which is a project of the Justice Center, that really caught my eye. And I think it points out, and Jackie said something, my friend Jackie, that's so true. Hey, and I was working in the 70s, so yeah, that kind of, that's so true in that we got to look at ways to come out of the box. And we also have got to have representatives like my friend Susan, who understands what needs to be done in the school system. But let me read something, and we need to think about this, because folks, this is serious, and as taxpayers, we've got to step up to the plate. Let me quote, North Carolina was once viewed as a shining example of progressive education policy in the South, with state leaders developing bipartisan support for public schools and implementing popular, effective programs. Over the past 7 years, however, the state has lost its reputation for educational excellence due to a number of controversial partisan measures, rapidly expanding school choice, cutting school resources, and eliminating job protections for teachers. These poorly executed efforts have failed to deliver positive results for North Carolina students. According to a new report from the North Carolina Justice Center, in turn, performance in our schools has suffered, particularly for children of color and those from families with low incomes. Here is our problem, folks. We've got to step up to the plate, and we got to do it. You know, we can talk about Washington, which we know is broke. Look at it. Raleigh is just as bad, but we're going to have to take it on here in Buncombe County. We've got to survive. It's going to have to be, we've got to do it. But unfortunately, though, as I had a conversation with Commissioner Belcher, he was saying, we can't buy our way out of this. We've got to, all hands have got to come on deck, and we got to look at all ideas. And when I hear us talk about it would take 2 to 5 years to implement something, folks, that won't cut it. We're losing kids, we're losing them. We're probably down 2 generations now and going. But we've got, and I'm glad to see here that we're stepping up to the plate. But as citizens, we're gonna have to take some things in our hand to make some corrections. If not, you'll be here 10 years from now and somebody will be talking about the same problems. And our poor kids will be just dropping through the cracks, as a lot are now.
I think it's a community issue. It's not just a government issue.
Yeah, I agree.
Because we've got employers who are hiring these parents who have children that are in childcare. And if you were talking about the fire chiefs, they've got fire department protection in those businesses. This has got to be a community issue. So what can we do to leverage those businesses? We've got Biltmore, we've got, and these are just the 2 off the top of my head, Mission. These are 2 of our largest employers. Where are they? Because you guys can't do it all. You don't have all the money. The state can't do it all. We clearly aren't getting the money. It's a community issue, and we need community public buy-in so that these businesses will make investments in the things that matter, because if they don't, families will move away from this region because they can't afford to live here any longer. As a lifelong resident, that's really hard to hear. I couldn't afford to buy my own house again, quite honestly.
No.
You know, it's a community issue that we need community buy-in and business participation. I think we need your help too. We need your help as well, but it's a bigger picture. And until our community sees children as a priority, we're going to be stuck, because parents send their children to childcare sick, because if they don't go to work, they lose their job. So then other children get sick. It's a vicious cycle. There isn't sick leave. It's, you know, it's just all these things building on. We need that community investment as well as local, state, and federal investments.
Rachel, I'll just say that this is a conversation that we have been having for at least a decade or more. And Kit, you were saying you were sitting there and you don't belong there. Oh, you absolutely belong there. Because I remember when I first got into this, the chamber had a roundtable that talked specifically about early childhood education and how we could address it through a public-private or a business community sort of collaboration. And I think we've had sort of stops and starts at this for a long, long time, and we've done some really good things. The thing that I think that I see is that we have one or two friends in the General Assembly right now who get the voucher problem, for example, or who get the articulation problem, for example, but they haven't gotten quite yet a handle on any of it. And we don't have enough momentum or enough physical energy in the form of bodies in place in the General Assembly to make these things happen. And so I hesitate to do this, but I will take it right down to the voting booth. If you know people who are Republican, Democrat, Independent, or unaffiliated, who have education as a high priority for themselves and for others, vote for them. If there are people who are running for office, Republican, Democrat, unaffiliated, or whatever, who don't have that as a priority, don't vote for them. And I think that what you all are doing here by keeping this conversation going is one of the most important things you can do, because part of the problem is that everybody went to school, so everybody's an expert. Not everybody went to medical school, and not everybody's a doctor, so they're not an expert. So you don't hear a whole lot of, talk about medicine down there in the General Assembly. But everybody went to school, so everybody knows everything. So what you have to do is just be louder. You have to be louder, and you have to be consistent, and you have to keep that conversation going, which I really applaud you for doing. Keep the conversation going and make sure that you have loudspeakers that go all the way to Raleigh and wherever it needs to go. And I am so glad to be here today for so many reasons. But thank you for letting me have a little bit of time here.
Rachel, can I ask a quick question? I'd love to hear the perspective of folks in higher ed at every level. We've heard about some of the challenges to recruitment and retention. Can you all talk to us about what happens when it works? What are the conditions that exist when folks are drawn to the field and are able to enter the pipeline and progress along the pipeline, just so we can better understand some of the things that perhaps could be replicated or that we could build upon?
Well, if I might attempt to address the point, it's been almost 30 years in K-12, and now I've been at Mars Hill almost 20, and teacher ed out there. Two side comments before I make a stab at your question. I think that the training of the professionals, whether it be the pre-K or the K-12, the infrastructure is in place. Now, refinements, of course, the rules keep changing, of course, but there's articulation between the community colleges and higher ed, holistically public and private, public system, the private system, and then individual campuses, Mars Hill specifically, have specific articulation agreements across a broad spectrum of programming with AB Tech and Blue Ridge as well as others, and not just in education, but in other fields as well. But the issue does come down to what are the incentives for employers, yes, mission, all of them, to value and have an understanding of the value, quality child care for their employers. And then there is also the issue of, how can we, as a general public, to Commissioner Whiteside's point, help those least able to afford it. And so the slots that are available in quality childcare in pre-K, whether it be Buncombe or Madison or any of the surrounding, the larger metro community. So, the ability to do those programs and attract the personnel is all driven by a living wage. It's driven by a living wage. As I was driving in this comment I heard on NPR about the volume, we have virtually full employment. If people want a job, there's jobs. But so many of them now are contract jobs. There are no benefits. There's no health care. There's no retirement incentives. So they are anxious, and then we'll hop, skip, and jump to get there. So we as a community, whether it's the university system, or Buncombe County government, or Madison County government, or mission, how do we structure ourselves with our employees, and do we help them find an avenue to advance themselves? Less and less employers now will provide an incentive for their employees to advance their education. Now, there are some that still do, with stipulations. Back in the dark ages when I was a superintendent, we actually had resources to help people move from a bachelor's degree to a master's degree. And now the state doesn't value a master's degree in training like it once did. The resources to fund that went away in most school systems. And so it is about the education of the larger public. And the comment that behind me, I've heard 1,000 times, if you went to school, you're an expert. We all didn't go to medical school or nursing school, so we're not experts. And we don't all have these comments about CPAs. Because we all didn't go, we all have to get our taxes done. So we take, and not to criticize that particular profession, but it's certainly true. If we went to school for just a little while, we know what good schooling is. I mean, that's kind of the mentality I've experienced through these 50 years of work almost. So, I'm sorry, I'm not giving you hard and fast, because there are no hard and fast, but it does come down to slots. It does come down to incentive for providers to have the programs that are high quality. And that comes down to what you have to deliver the program with. And so, whether it's from an employer where, childcare subsidies at 50% of cost, or whatever it is, it makes a difference for people being willing to step up. And it's certainly true, the point made by one of my colleagues, that they take their children to childcare when they're sick because they're afraid to lose their job.
And teachers come to work sick because we don't have anybody to be in the classroom for them. So everybody stays sick.
I think to answer what you were asking about, I think when it works, you end up with a very passionate teacher who will work for the pay that he or she can get. They will come and get those degrees, they will get more degrees, they will get more education, but then they move on. I'm a prime example of that. I came out of one field. I have a bachelor's in education of deaf children, worked with children in public schools who were deaf and hard of hearing. Left that position when I had children of my own and worked for one of our local providers. Joined and got a master's degree and a teaching license and taught NC pre-K for a number of years when it was more at 4 a long time ago. And then I moved on because I could get higher pay outside of the classroom.
And do we have data on that question? I mean, in terms of the, there's a lot of attention that we give to the, how do we recruit people to enter this profession, right? Which obviously we need people to enter the pipeline, but equally important is people not leaving the pipeline, right? And in some ways, maybe more important, because once you get people trained and they've done this for a few years, they get really good at it. So they're our most valuable employees. So keeping people in it is probably even more important than how we get more volume coming in. So do we have good data on how long folks, make this their job on average, and what we could do to make that longer?
Our workforce board rep in the back, I wonder what data is available about kind of entries and exits from the career path.
As far as turnover, I don't have that data right off the top of my head. We do know that the lowest paid workers in our society are those that take care of us when we're young and those that take care of us when we're old. So if we look at, not to analogize the issues, but if we look at the long-term care challenges and CNAs, we could employ over 500 CNAs today if we had them in facilities in our region and hospitals and long-term care facilities and other settings. So, the economics of it is really tough, and that's why I'm here to try to glean some wisdom, because y'all, I think the chairman's point is well taken, that while, we've got to focus on turnover, because you train someone and then they leave you. But, it's a tight labor market now, and we have the tightest labor market in the state. The macro challenge in our region, and I don't know if there's an easy solution, but the top 20 sectors of our economy, there are only 2 sectors in our region that pay above the state average for that sector, and that's healthcare and hospitality and tourism. Every other sector pays less, and our biggest disparity is in our highest paying sectors. So, like IT or finance or other areas, that's where actually our wages are the lowest. Even in manufacturing, our average manufacturing wage in our region is over $50,000, but our manufacturing wages are below, the state average. So, that's the macro challenge. The good news is people want to live here, and we have a really vibrant economy. We have about 13,000 job openings today, and they're not all low-paying jobs. We've got a lot of high-paying jobs that employers are struggling to fill. So when someone considers, well, I'll go to school and go into early childhood, well, look at nursing, or look at engineering, or look at the other career opportunities they have. Over a lifetime, there'll be millions of dollars in the difference between their lifetime earnings if they choose to go into early childhood versus going into, some of these higher demand, or not higher demand, higher paying areas. So I don't think I answered your question, Chairman.
We'll capture that as a data point. We have an upcoming economic brief that will look at some of the job sectors with Cindy of Economics, and maybe some data that you can get to.
So I think for future thought, I don't want to leave Ms. Bosworth's comment about the community. We have met often with some of the, whether it be Mission or whoever, that you said to fix this, it's going to be a community, if we're going to be active in trying to find a solution, because we're just going to be reactive to all the other things, whether it be elections, whether it be national, whether it be state, whether it be, we go to a meeting and we come back and we're like, we got to figure out how to fix this. But I went to the new YMCA in Candler that opened. You know what they have? Child care. They can figure it out. Some of these other people that you mentioned can figure it out. The company I used to work with figured it out.
But are they a licensed center
They
that
are
has
not
the same requirements?
I don't know about all that. That's y'all's deal.
That's the thing, those types of childcares in
I know,
places
but
like
I'm just
Hawaii
saying, they made a commitment.
are just simple babysitting, and their staff don't have to
I understand
have
that. I
the
understand
training and qualifications, so
But-
it does make a little difference.
I understand. But what my point is that it was part of their thought process to provide that. There are employers that it is part of their thought process to do 2 things, part of their business model to do 2 things. One is to provide that ongoing education that Dr. Lunsford mentioned once they are employed, and the other is to provide childcare. And I know it's a different thing, but it's all part of the same conversation. What they're trying to do is provide opportunities for their parents and also to provide some provision for those children from an economic standpoint too. So,
If I could add a PS, excuse me, a PS to your comment about the Candler, why I've not had a chance to go there. But I know why it's there. It's because two individuals in the Candler community stepped up to the plate.
sure did.
And they stepped up to the plate from Mars Hill and
Yep.
AV Tech and Mission Hospital called Carolyn and Jack Ferguson.
Amen, they sure did.
They understand the
They get it.
issue of having those resources in the community. And so it is about getting the understanding in the education. The turnover rate, once upon a time, and I don't know where Representative Fisher would be able to enhance what I'm going to say, the State Board of Education tracked the turnover rate for every school system in the state of North Carolina as to whether they left North Carolina or whether they left Buncombe to go to Henderson or vice versa. And at once upon a time, the western part of the state had the highest retention rate of K-12 educators. It was not +10 years, but it was +5, whereas the rest of the state had a much lower retention rate. And that has to go back to what Ms. Ramsey said in terms of people who want to live here and the environment and the quality experiences. But it's still an enormous loss of resources. To the chairman's point, when you train them and they're out the door in 5 years, that lost investment is phenomenal. But there are points where you can get that data.
But to Jasmine's question, there are states that do this very successfully, and I guess I'd like to know the difference of what they do compared to what North Carolina.
And a lot of the themes of the questions that have come our way is what can we control? What's within the state control, what's within our local control? What are some ideas, knowing that we're also playing the long game and working on state advocacy and looking at kind of those larger systemic shifts at the policy level? What are some things that we can do here, now, to make a difference?
So I want to respond to the higher ed question, what examples are out there? And I apologize for being late. I know I missed Jackie Pinnock's talk, so I want to talk a little bit about the relationship that Warren Wilson has, I think as an anchor institution really, to respond to this. We have a relationship with Werner Early Learning Center where our students are working at a highly effective facility. So they're co-educators with us. Students that are in our coursework see that relationship there as a pathway into early childhood. And I think by professionalizing it in that way, we draw students into early childhood, students that maybe wouldn't consider it otherwise. And they also graduate with these, very practiced, they've had opportunities in an experiential setting beyond the coursework that really make them effective in the classroom. Many of them stay at Werner. We still run into the same problem of the fewer financial incentives to stay in the work. But I think in terms of drawing them into working in early childhood and being effective by having that co-educational relationship, they are really becoming the leaders in the field. And I also, I think for us in higher education, we see it as our responsibility really, as a sort of a lead anchor institution in the community to serve and work in that facility. So we have students on work crews, anywhere between 10 and 15 a semester working in Werner, and also internships. And people have started a garden program close by the center that are Warren Wilson graduates. So I think that's a possible solution is looking for anchor institutions that want to partner in this work.
If I might add to that, that's the same thing I was thinking, is that I have a background in CTE, but then also in community college and now at the university level. And that's the one thing that I think can answer your question the most is how do we recruit, how do we retain? And I think it's exactly what Ms. Bosworth was alluding to, is that it takes a passion. And so if we don't develop that passion, these students are not going to come to us to begin with, and then we're not going to be able to continue through with that process to not only educate them, but to have that passion exist to where they want to be in that field. Because when you talk about burnout, I cannot even imagine. I mean, I have twins. Two's way more than enough for me. I can't imagine someone with a classroom full. And so I do think about, if we don't have that passion that exists, then we know the pay's not there. And that's something that can be worked on, but it's not something that's gonna be changed overnight. So I think one of the things that we've not mentioned, but I think is a really crucial part of this, is going back to even the CTE classroom, where the early childhood education programs can exist to develop that passion that brings them, it's that pipeline. It's developing that pipeline, as you were just saying, and where does that pipeline begin? As early as possible. We've got to get students who develop a passion so that when they, think about early childhood education, they're not looking at the financial side of it. We'd like to say our students are not, we tend to focus on them not being financially literate coming in, but I can guarantee you, as someone who's recruiting, that's one thing they do know about financially is, how much money will I make upon graduation? So when we cannot give them the numbers they're looking for there, we have to give them something else. So I think
Can you educate us for a sec? CTE stands for?
Career and Technical Education. It's
Okay,
the
great.
high school level.
So, okay, so you're
Our
talking high
CTE
school
programs
level.
across the state have an early childhood education component to them. And we've just seen, I'm from Gaston County, and I can tell you that in the county where I've worked for many, many years, that has been a crucial part of our early childhood education pipeline.
Right.
Is just developing that love for CTE, love in the CTE classroom.
Yeah.
And then it's something that they're not pursuing for the financial aspect of it, it's because they enjoy their day-to-day interactions with these children. So.
Yeah, and I'll, just from personal experience, reiterate that before I moved to North Carolina, I lived in Tennessee. So when you talk about what other states do that's successful, and at my daughter's first daycare that she attended, they actually had a developed partnership with the area high school. And the high school students, it was part of their curriculum, and they came in their last 3 years and actually worked with the children hands-on. And so they were developing the students at a very young age to get into the classroom and form those relationships. And since moving to North Carolina, and I live over in Jackson County, that's something that I don't see happening, is the students being in the classroom at a young age. And so I really think that you've got to start that as early as you can.
One of the things I'd like to comment on is just that within our model, we don't allow for that phase in or for that opportunity for hands-on experiential learning as much. And to Brian's point and to Jackie's point, we have to allow folks to be in the classroom and shadow and work and be with the children. But there are, within our model, which operates under the federal guidelines and then the state guidelines, that isn't allowed to be done because of requirements of the lead teacher, the assistant teacher, backgrounds, all of those things. And I think we've missed an opportunity to work with folks that want to come back in from higher education, but can't because of those extra requirements that they're not willing to necessarily go back to school again. So I would challenge everyone to look at the model that we operate under. Are there opportunities to tweak that aspect of it and see where we may be cutting our nose off to spite our face in allowing people to gain the passion, shadow in the classroom, or come back in and work in early education, if that really is where their passion is and what they want to do.
Excuse me. I like what you had to say, because when I was in high school, and that was a long time ago, we had the opportunity to go out and learn how to be mechanics, just leave that side. I worked at Harris Cadillac, which is uptown here. That helped me get into the career I was looking for. You're exactly right. These students in school, they can go, and if that gives them the determination if they would like to do it or not. They're going to, and if they do, then that's a pathway. And everybody that, like me, that worked as an apprentice, didn't go into that field. They tried a different field or whatever, but you could try 2 or 3. We somehow, legislation, Susan, we need to figure out how to do this for our kids to be able to do this. That's my thought.
And Lisa, you go all the way back to middle school. This Yeah, and I know you've been to several, other people have been to the career days at middle school. And I remember, you know, a Mason at my church who was known for having out front his block laying demonstration where he was laying brick. And I remember, you know, not, but watch me closely, both sides of my mouth are going to move, so. It is so important when we talk about pay, and my passion is towards all of these lower paid positions. And it is because I believe they're doing the work and they should get paid for it. And I want them to stay in Buncombe County, I don't want them to go somewhere else. But at the same time, not everything's about the money. It's just not. Some people just love it. And I think about the retired people that, what drives me crazy is when you tell me there's 5 retired people that want to go back and help kids who has raised more kids. I mean, we probably, it's amazing how many children they've influenced over maybe 50 or 60 or 70 years, and they can't go back and do it. That's a big issue from a legislative standpoint or wherever that we need to try to fix. But if we can start early and find those that love, their mamas and daddies love children, their grandmas and grandpas love children, they love them, and we can go back to the CTE model is a big deal in Buncombe County. We can go back and find those that love these children, then we can figure the rest of it out. If we can get it, if we can do that, that'll be a big help.
But I think, to Susan's point, it's important to know where leaders stand. It's great to love children. It's great to want to go into burning buildings. But until we value that, and whether it's right or wrong, it's right for a football player to get $1 gazillion, but our values are skewed until we can align with elected folks who should be the leaders in this. It's never going to change because, and I love the YM, don't get me wrong, but we have to really be clear on the distinction of what the YW does for pre-K, for instance, and the YM. And I love both, but I think it's really important to make that distinction because what happens at the YM, they haven't had to go through the hurdles that the YW has to go through. And I think it's all good, but I think it's really important to make a distinction.
The drop-in model versus the.
Yeah.
I have another question for our friends in higher education and training. For folks who read that New York Times Magazine article, one of the models it referenced was an apprenticeship model that's being piloted in the Philadelphia area, bringing together, as I understand, community colleges, a network of more than 20 local providers, a labor union, which exists there in a different way. But the model is, I understand sort of the thin layer of what it does, but it allows people who are currently employed in the field to become apprentices and through their daily work and mentorship in that setting, advance as they show up to work each day, basically. So just wondered if there's been thought about approaches like that, or if there's anything underway currently in the region that's looking at the apprenticeship model as one vehicle that might sort of, we're operating in a tightly constricted system that's broken in some ways and has a lot of limitations, but there also, because you all are showing us every day, there's cracks where there's room to run by working outside the box, et cetera, et cetera. So that was sort of one of our interests today, was creating a space and giving lift to what are some of those ideas where there might be some room to run, even in pilot levels locally, and figure out whether we might sort of learn enough to figure out some ways to work around the system while it continues to get fixed, hopefully. So, circling back, would love to hear thoughts and folks kind of chewing on that idea of whether there might be room for an apprenticeship model to fit into our local ecosystem.
I think there's currently some structure for that under the EESLPD, which is what our licensed teachers in non-public schools model. They have mentors and evaluators that support them. It's a really complicated system, and as these folks shared earlier, it's a complicated system and it's underfunded and there's not enough people. But there is some piece of that happening. I know at least on our side, we have, all of our classes require some interaction with children throughout the semester. It varies in form. Sometimes it's just a single assignment, you go observe. Some courses, it's you're going to do a number of observations, and then we top off the degree with our early childhood capstone practicum. And then that's where our students are placed for the semester for 9 hours a week in a local program. Sometimes it's their employer, many times it's not, which is difficult if they're already employed, because then they have to leave work and lose money. But we have that built into our programs. Part of the articulation agreement that we're working on will result in a further tweak of one of our courses, one of our most important courses, infants, toddlers, and twos, where that there will be a fieldwork experience expected in that class. Whereas I think we've already, at least us, we already do it, we already require it, but it's going to become more formal and be in the course description for all the colleges. So we already do some of that work now. And kind of tied to that is our high schools. So Rachel handed me an idea of what the education options are for high schools. Some of our high schools locally, Irwin, Reynolds, Robertson, Asheville High, and Madison, that catches AV Tech's catchment area, have child care centers on site. They have teachers who teach early childhood courses, and they work in those classrooms and get that experience. That earlier experience of watching that block mason, they get to be in the classroom. We've got, for other high school students, they can participate in the Career and College Promise, which is tuition free for juniors, well, 16 and up, to come to AV Tech. And so we get a number of students that way. In fact, I have students that are in a high school that don't have an early childhood program. So we've got those pieces that they can come and get, and through that, they're in our courses, which means they have to go to observe children or interact with children in group care. So there's a number of options for high schools, although I liked what you said about what Tennessee does, and I added that to this idea because now I've got 3 students at Inca this semester who don't have an early childhood classroom on site in their high school, so now I'm going to go find somewhere for them to go. And partner, because I think that's a really great opportunity. And I know Henderson County y'all have childcare in a couple of high schools.
Yeah.
So,
and even on our campus, we have a Head Start program there on campus too, because we have an innovative high school on campus, as well as an early college on campus. So we also have that College and Career Promise certificates that the students in high school can also earn, and doing observations within the classrooms, and just the same as AV Tech. So we are doing a lot of that already, and that's kind of that CTE pathway.
Right. Yeah,
Where,
and you've built it all, it's all happening on your campus?
yeah.
Huh. So the early pipeline exists, I mean, you're co-located,
Yes.
and there's a lot of room for integration, that's really interesting.
It's already in existence.
Yeah.
Currently at AV Tech, there's not.
there's not. But we've got really strong partnerships. I've got students currently in Head Start classrooms at Verner, at Elida, in their internships, in their capstone practicums. So I also use local centers and have good relationships with a lot of local centers for experience.
So that seems like a no-brainer.
You'll just have to stand up back there.
I
I saw a hand.
About local strategies, as we look for ways that Buncombe County can make changes or put new policies in place that will positively impact. One thing that might be important to think about is the evolution and the transitions that are currently occurring in the world of early childhood. When we first started the early childhood program in North Carolina, it started to be a support for low-income working parents. And in those first years, we centered all of our energy around access, non-traditional hours of care, what do we do with parents who work shift, and our focus was parents. As we evolved that program, we began to understand about brain architecture, and we decided that the quality of what happens to the child during the day is what was going to make workforce development and create the next workforce. And we centered on the education of the teacher who was with the child. With new regulations, we became increasingly aware of the safety of young children. And we said, okay, these people who were taking care of our mama work, who were the educator, now they need to do CPR, they need to be able to do evacuation plans, and we have to do health and safety. And so for our providers, we are asking a tremendous amount from providers. So we have to look at, is there a way that during the transition of where we want our early childhood programs to be in the next few years, what can we do to support that transition so that those programs can get there? And I think there are some real innovative solutions around assisting with criminal background checks, assisting with temporary substitute, assisting with apprentice programs, and many of those kinds of ways. But the recognition that the early childhood program itself has been under huge stress to respond to everything that we're now learning about young children. I think it's a great opportunity for Buncombe County to say, how can we help while the state works out a master plan for what we should do to go forward? I didn't mean to ramble.
That's great.
I just wanted to say that the things that I'm going to pledge to work on in this, between now and the next time we meet, or in the next session of the legislature, is to find, just as you said, ways for the state to help with things like wading through the whole voucher morass. I know that, and it's ridiculous if you have to hire someone and you're a very low scale child care center and you're having to hire somebody to wade through the voucher problem. We need to have some centrally located folks at HHS, DCD, I don't know, all of them out to help from the state level, those local folks. And then the other thing is that I want to suggest that we look at incentives other than just an apprenticeship, which is awesome. I think apprenticeships are very important. But we need to look at incentives for pay for child care providers. When you have a situation that I heard Asheville City Preschool talking about where you pay your folks, but they still are eligible for social services assistance, that's costing us more than it would cost for us to establish a decent rate of pay to begin with. So we need to, I know money doesn't solve everything, but when you have someone who's coming out of an early childhood program and they're looking to see how much they're going to be paid and they see what they're going to be paid, they're not going to want to go there. When people are looking to bring new companies into areas, they develop these ridiculously impressive incentive packages. We need to look at an incentive package that comes from the county, from the city, from wherever, from the chamber, from public-private, wherever, to pay these child care providers as they're coming out of their education programs to go into that business. And, that will help all the way down the line from the people, from the companies who want to locate in this area. When they see that we support child care in not just in curriculum, but in pay for the providers, they're going to want to be here. That should be part of any planning that we do for bringing in new folks.
I love your economic policy.
Good.
Include that, yeah.
Awesome.
I love your self-pledge, what I pledge to work.
I will,
Next
yes.
time.
I wanted to mention one thing, Representative Fisher, I want to add something to your list. It was mentioned earlier that reimbursement rates are amongst the lowest in the state for child care subsidies here. I about popped a blood vessel last year when I learned that economic incentive tiers are used to help figure out what reimbursement looks like. And let me note, all right, so you've got, if we're amongst the lowest, and we're tier 3, which is the highest tier in Buncombe County, Haywood County, and we're in the same tier with Raleigh and Charlotte in some of the largest communities in the state. And Haywood County is also a tier 3, whereas Greensboro is a tier 2 community. I mean, it makes absolutely no sense to me. So our lobbyist has been working with some legislators to try and eliminate the use of incentive tiers. Number one, the incentive tier system is just screwed up, period. But secondly, not only did I find out it was being used for subsidies, but it was being used to determine whether art museums, what kinds of reimbursement or grants that they're capable. If they're in tier 3, they're in the lowest rank. Whereas it's a huge problem. We've been working on suggesting some changes to the economic incentive tier in an effort to, because 40% of the people who work in Buncombe County come from outside the county. So we have to care about the whole MSA. We actually have a 10-county labor shed. So we have to care about that for everybody involved. So there are ancillary things that you may not think have anything to do with childcare, and yet they are, and they're impacting it in a huge way. So we look forward to reaching out to our legislators on that issue and continuing to try to change it.
Amy from Partnership Academy.
Thank you. That is a huge issue. And Sheila and Beth could speak more to this, but if you took the rates that are currently paid, the reimbursement rates in Raleigh, and you compare those to Buncombe County, the difference per year and what Buncombe County is losing is $5 million. That's huge. So just to address a couple of points that are brought up earlier. So retention rates, the turnover rate, in FY15, it was 12% across the state. It rose to 19% in FY16, but in Buncombe County, it's 25%.
In this field.
Yes, yeah, in early childhood, and those are the participants, that's only for the folks that are participating in wages, that educational supplement program. So what does that mean for folks that aren't even participating in that? And that gives you some sense. So to try and think a little bit more creatively about what can happen at a local level, there's been some discussions between folks at AB Tech and Buncombe Partnership for Children's staff, and I have folks here who speak in more detail to it, and give opportunities. I think Jay stepped out to really address a number of issues, looking at recruitment, retention, and ongoing professional development by creating a highly qualified substitute pool that involves some training and then placement of folks, and that is a way for folks to really determine, hey, is this a career I want to take on? And then get access to higher education through AB Tech, as well as work more closely with the high school program. Some folks have referenced the CTE program. So Buncombe County Schools has some great programs. Asheville City Schools has one in the Asheville City High, and so we began working with those programs this year. I think there's a lot more that we could do there with those students to get access to higher ed through the College to Career Promise, and to get some more support through the partnership for training, as well as for those folks who are in the field as young, have just started in the field as early educators, to get ongoing individual coaching. So yes, that would cost some money. We have a budget fleshed out, but it's not an inordinate amount of money. And it's a creative way to also work with Green Opportunities, who have identified that despite the 4% unemployment rate in the community that they directly serve, unemployment is 30%. So anyway, this is a way to address all of those things: recruitment, professional development, ongoing retention.
So I'll be hearing from Amy and that group of providers who are working on that model and bringing that forward to commissioners. Jane's had her hand up in the back briefly, and then we'll get back to higher education.
I just wanted to say, when you're talking, Jasmine, about different models and different pilot programs, I'd like us also to look at some of the models that have happened successfully across the country, like, you know, and are actually happening here as well, like shared services with Sheila's program, or worker-owned co-ops like in Philadelphia, so that the workers become the owners of the business. And in childcare, that has been a very successful model. So I think, you know, if we can think along those lines as well, so that not only just the same way it's been done.
Thank you, Jane.
I just want to build on Susan's comments in particular. We once had a BK program at UNC Asheville until I think 8 or so years ago, but shortly before I became the dean. And the reason why we no longer have a BK program is simply that there weren't enough students enrolled in the program, and we had a cohort of 4 or 5 students a year. And when the faculty member who was directing the program took a job elsewhere, it's another retention issue. When the faculty member took a job elsewhere, the university decided that it didn't make sense to continue a program like that. So the question for us really is thinking about why couldn't we get students there? I don't think it was a question of igniting passion. It really was a question, I think, of compensation. I think so. We've got to find a way to make this an attractive, long-term career for folks. Because getting a university degree is not an inexpensive proposition. But to compound that, I think we need to find a way to make this an attractive long-term career without increasing the direct cost to families. And we're going to have this conundrum of being a service that is simultaneously too expensive for the people who need it and undervalued for the people who provide it. And we've got to find a way to bridge that gap between the two things. Passion won't pay the rent that it did for musicians. But I also want to point out that for me, since I'm not overseeing just the Department of Education, but working with things like the university more broadly, this is a workforce issue for us as well. Right. And we've had conversations as a university, mostly driven by the Faculty Senate and the Faculty Welfare and Development Committee. I think they had some conversations with Vern, I don't know if they met with you directly or not, Jackie, about how can we provide not only child care, but early childhood education for the children of our faculty and staff. Because it's an important issue, particularly right now as we're going through a generational transition in higher education. So I want to think about it from that side as well.
Drs. Jonas and Lunsford both had your hands up in the last couple of minutes.
Okay, all right. So Jasmine, you asked about room to run. I think we have a strong, as I talked about the Warren-Wilson relationship, the lab school model with Werner. But hearing, from community colleges, I think there's a possibility. I want to explore the possibility of a partnership with AV Tech, maybe an AV Tech Warren-Wilson Werner relationship. Warren-Wilson just rolled out this NC-free tuition that will make higher ed, that 4-year degree, more accessible. But I think what we're lacking is some of the expertise from AV Tech and some of the licensure pieces. That I see some room to run there, the possibility that could be a win-win to draw more people into the field, to have a stronger relationship with community college, and to also offer this 4-year degree pathway for students that are already in your program, and this amazing lab school relationship. So Jackie, I don't know if this sounds even plausible, but I'd love to, that looks like a place to run for me in terms of developing a stronger apprenticeship program.
It's beneficial for everybody because 3 of my students last spring were hired before the end of the semester to be employees of Werner.
Great.
So when they do their final capstone, they're getting hired if they're not already working. And one of them left another center to work for Werner. So there's some good benefit, but most of those 3 students, only one of those changed jobs. The other 2 had not been employed, so that was a win-win, and I think that's a good approach.
Standing here, I've gotten to have this vantage point of seeing everyone's pens flying, and I hope you're working on your 1 or 2 or 3 things that were an aha that you'll be following up on at the county staff level. We will certainly distill and compile and share out this information. Any materials that we use during the session will be on the Board of Commissioners web page for the meeting. The one thing that's not on there yet is the PowerPoint presentation. We'll get that up later today. And we will make these notes available. Please make sure you've signed the sign-in sheet, and if you haven't, leave me a business card so that we can stay in touch. What kind of summarizing or closing remarks from any members of the board?
I think we need to really pursue AB Tech, because that, without that, the wheels are off the bus for us. It's a natural no-brainer to pursue that vigorously.
I think one of the things we didn't really start with is the commission didn't just adopt strategies, but they really did, as Commissioner Frost said, pull funding out of economic development and say this is a future workforce issue. So those concrete strategies, especially as you talk about, and I know all the work you've done on the articulation agreement, what are those concrete challenges to people moving from an associate degree to a 4-year degree? I've heard substitute pool, I've heard stipends for practicum when you're missing work. The more we can get our hands around those concrete things that we can do now while we wait for state and national solutions, I think that'll be really helpful in how we do that follow-up. Because things like tuition assistance in exchange for work have been hugely successful for us in nursing fields and social work fields. So those are the kind of concrete things I think we could talk about with the funds that have been allocated.
Yeah, and just to, again, express incredible thanks, folks, for sharing your time, your expertise, and appreciation to my fellow commissioners and the county staff for an approach that's, I think, really been about trying to identify those actionable areas where we can take immediate steps, where we can be learning immediate lessons, and in some ways sort of build the road by walking as we work towards this longer-term vision of ultimately being able to ensure that every kiddo in our community has equal access to high-quality education, and beyond that, not just education, of course, everything they need to be able to thrive. But we can't state enough the openness to hearing ideas, and I think that I've heard from everyone on commission, certainly a real recognition that we're going to have to try out a lot of different things. And so please don't hold back if you've got ideas. It doesn't mean we can act on all of them immediately, but we certainly want to hear them and figure out how the county can be an effective partner and continuing to move forward. So it was awesome to hear some concrete ideas kind of starting to bubble up and great questions about where this might go next. So I just personally want to say thank you to everyone.
I'd also like to say thanks to everyone for putting this together. This was very educational for me today, and as being part of what Jasmine helped me with. And I whispered to her during this is further deeper than I ever thought it was. But a couple notes that I made here, Jennifer, I just loved everything you said. I mean, it made such good sense of what the community, yes, we can go state, we can go county, we can go federal, but it's got to start in the community here. It's got to. We, the YMCA, Canada, who started it? The community started it. I was fortunate enough to jump in elementary school over the death of the little girl, a year and a half ago. That I took it on myself as a commissioner out there, not to spend the taxpayers' money, went out and funded a playground. And the kids, whenever I went out there, and they say this is absolutely the best day of my life. You don't know what that means to me, that you hear that kind of thing. Susan, one thing you said there that means a whole lot. And you said whenever you're voting to look at the priority, that's exactly right. But as I read last time, that was every local, state, #1 priority. But it was like it fell off the boat after the election. And you said it's been going on 10 decades. I mean, a decade, 10 years.
Feels like 10 decades.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Right. But it was everyone's priority, and that is why I'm so proud that Jasmine and myself, and I mean, listen, I'm a small part of what she has done here. And once we leave here today, this don't need to roll over and, okay, whatever our next workshop is, be our priority. Cause I think as a commission, all 7 of us voted unanimous that this is one of the 3 top priorities.
That's right.
And let's keep it going. But thank y'all very much.
You know, and what I'm glad to say is, most of you know me, you know, this has been all my life. I've spent, 16 years on 2 different university boards, 8 years on K through 12 here. But the most frustrating thing to me over that 24-year term is to see us continue to talk about preschool, a K through 3 education. And we can't afford to talk anymore. Now it's time for us to act. And Commissioner Presley was right. You know, we can't, you know, you see all politicians step up to the plate when they run for election and talk about education. But it disappears until 4 years later or 2 years later. But a lot of us have lived it, and we're going to continue to fight for it. But my concern is, and that's why I'm glad to see all of us here in the room, because in Buncombe County, which we can control, let's get something done. And I feel confident that we will, and within the county, because if we don't do it, nobody's gonna do it for us. And thanks for coming out.
Staff will be going through the ideas and continuing conversations with partners in the room. What are some things we can do right away? What are some things that we maybe can implement in the next fiscal year? So please contact me as a liaison anytime to reach anyone in the county, and go to the Board of Commissioners website for phone numbers or email addresses for any of the members of the selected board. We extend this invitation. We're thankful for the board for setting the stage today, and to be continued, right? Thank you.
Thank you.